The trenches of World War I were where the seeds of Nazism and the Third Reich were sown. After a devastating war lasting 4 years, disillusioned German soldiers returned to Germany, sliding into depression. During this period, a wheelbarrow full of money was needed to buy a loaf of bread. Under these conditions, many Germans lost all of their savings and could not afford to eat. The despair and resentment that followed will alter the course of world history forever. The man that would later send the world into war was an Austrian soldier by the name of Adolf Hitler. Hitler returned to his home in Munich after the First World War and saw the city in turmoil. Germany had been chained by the Treaty of Versailles, and in addition to ceding territory, was forced to dismantle their army, create a new democratic government, and pay 132 billion marks to the Allies as war reparations. Still serving the army, Hitler was assigned to spy on a group calling themselves the German Workers' Party. However, the radical ideals appealed to Hitler and he joined the party. He took an active role as a leader by July 1921. The name of the group was changed to National Socialist German Workers' Party. As support for the Nazi Party grew, Hitler and his comrades began planning a coup in Munich. On November 8th, Hitler and his supporters attempted a revolution, but was quickly put down by a state police counterattack on November 9th. Hitler and the Nazi leadership were arrested. The Nazi Party headquarters were raided and the party was banned from Munich. Hitler was charged with treason and sentenced to 5 years of imprisonment. He served less than a year in jail and received favored treatment from guards and fan mail. During his time in jail, he wrote Mein Kampf, which was an autobiography of himself and an exposition of his ideology. His book influenced many Germans. It would sell more than 10 million copies by the end of the Second World War.
The turning point for Hitler's rise came with the Wall Street crash in 1929, which led to widespread unemployment in Germany as the global economy crashed. This fueled support for the Nazis as Hitler had promised more jobs and future economic stability while blaming the situation on the Weimar Republic that came into power after the First World War. Elections in 1932 saw the Nazi Party become the largest in the Reichstag, the German parliament, although they did not have an overall majority needed to win control of the government. However, several political parties voted for him as chancellor, and on January 13, 1933, he was sworn into office. He immediately consolidated his power, and on February 27th, the Reichstag mysteriously went up in flames. Hitler blamed the communists and used this as an excuse to suspend all civil rights. The act was passed and gave him complete control over Germany. Now, with Germany under his control, Hitler set his eyes on Europe. He began issuing orders in direct defiance of the Treaty of Versailles. He expanded Germany's army to 600,000 men and created an air force for Germany. The League of Nations protested against this, but ultimately did nothing to stop him. The League of Nations was crippled by the fact that it did not have a military force of its own and ultimately had no power to stop Hitler. Hitler was emboldened by the League of Nations' failure to stop him, and he would continue to use his aggressive style of diplomacy.
However, Hitler could not arm his troops without the Rhineland, the industrial heart of Germany, which had been demilitarized in accordance to the Treaty of Versailles. In 1936, Hitler ordered several regiments into the Rhineland. Once again, the League of Nations did nothing to stop him. This is his second major diplomatic gamble, and it had paid off. Hitler later stated that if France had sent soldiers to stop him, his new army would have been crushed and the Nazi Party would have lost its support. However, Britain and France were following a policy of appeasement towards Hitler. They gave in to his demands in defiance of the Treaty of Versailles to keep the peace. The United States was following a policy of isolationism. They did not want to interfere with Europe, so Hitler got away with his blatant defiance. With the Rhineland, rearmament of the army increased at staggering rates. As Germany was preparing for war, it convinced the world of its peaceful intentions through Nazi propaganda and ambassadors. They stated that Germany only wanted what was unfairly taken from them. Hitler, however, already planned his conquest of Europe. He set his sights on Austria and Czechoslovakia. The Treaty of Versailles had forbidden a union between Austria and Germany, two of the main powers of World War I. and created Czechoslovakia out of pieces of the old Austrian Empire and Germany.
Hitler engaged in his own style of diplomacy, in which he intimidated and bullied the Austrian Chancellor Kurt Schuschnigg, until he gave in to Hitler's demands and signed a paper giving several positions of power to Nazis. Soon, Schuschnigg resigned and was replaced by a new Nazi chancellor. Within hours, German troops were marching to Austria. News of the invasion was greeted with no response by either Britain or France, who both continued to follow a policy of appeasement. Many Austrians were sympathetic to the Nazis. Hitler then ordered a law providing for a union between Austria and Germany.
After weeks of frantic diplomatic activity, the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, and the French Prime Minister, Daladier, signed an agreement with Hitler, giving him permission to take the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia in return for his promise of no more German expansion. Britain and France confronted the Czech government and advised them to cooperate with Hitler. The Czechs, realizing that the Allies had abandoned them, reluctantly gave up to Hitler's demands. Neville Chamberlain responded by proclaiming that there would be peace in our time.
Hitler went back on his promise and used the diplomacy that had worked so well on Austria to intimidate the Czech president into submission. France and Britain still just stood by and watched as German troops marched into the rest of Czechoslovakia. Britain and France had had enough. Disgusted, the leaders of Britain and France trashed the policy of appeasement. Chamberlain then declared Hitler's next likely victim, Poland, would have the full support of Britain and France. Chamberlain would be forced to resign though. Few people were willing to work with him because of his failure to stop Hitler, and Winston Churchill was chosen to succeed him. Hitler's will-less rise to power had ended. The next time German troops marched into foreign land, there would be war.
Hitler believed that the Allies would do nothing. He called the leaders of France and Britain little worms after what he saw in Munich. Years of successful acquisitions had made him arrogant, and he believed that Britain and France would not do anything to stop them. He went ahead and invaded Poland in 1939, which marked the start of World War II. The failure of influential nations to stop the transgressions of another nation will lead to a larger and more devastating conflict in the future than what conflict there may have been in the first place. Nations with aggressive dictators will continue to expand their power and influence if no one takes a stand against them. In the case of Hitler, the failure of France and England to uphold the Treaty of Versailles and the policy of appeasement gave Hitler many diplomatic victories and ultimately led to another world war. But in the end, the Allies defeated Hitler and the Nazis after several years of fighting and millions of deaths.